We can sit around in the alternative media and we can moan about the fact that listings in Google are constantly being manipulated through algorithms, or we can do something about it.
Hello, and tonight's headlines.
The Iconic Media Group is a genuine alternative.
I never fully switch off. It's almost like having the radio on in the background.
What is the reaction to that from within the industry?
Well, I hide a lot.
Hello, welcome to Real Education with Lana.
However, we want to grow this into being one of the biggest independent platforms, if not the biggest independent platform in the world.
I brought in Max Egan to talk about it. Mr. Egan, no need for introductions, but I've done it anyway. Say hello to Iconic.
And welcome to the very first episode of Amanda's Secret Chamber.
I felt it, I know what pain feels like. It's horrible to suffer mentally because everything's here. It's just in here.
This gives the strong impression that we know what we're talking about.
I want to leave this world having made the biggest difference I can.
A genuine alternative that will cast a light on subjects that the mainstream media, and to be fair, large swathes of the alternative media either can't or won't.
All right, we are back live on air with David Icke, and we are discussing almost everything in reference to his book, The Trigger. It's about the 9/11 catalyst that actually set us in motion to a world of potential enslavement and what we can do about it. Perhaps maybe we'll talk about some solutions later on in the show. And David, what's amazing to me is that you had General Clark, you had people talking back in 1997 about what's going on in the Middle East. And of course, 9/11 was our stepping stone, was our way in to Afghanistan, which opened up these seven countries that were in the process of trying to topple.
The New American Century, 1997.
So can you speak to that in reference to the Greater Israel Project, and what's the real purpose behind 9/11 over in the Middle East?
Well, let me give you a sequence of events, which will take us through all this to present time. If this global manipulation has been going on, this web of manipulation, connected web, has been going on for a long, long time. But you can pick up one strand of it, which has become a very central strand now, in the 17th century, with a guy called Sabbatian Zevi. He claimed to be a Jewish messiah, and he got this enormous, for its time, following, according to Jewish sources, about 1 million people. And he called himself the Jewish Messiah, but he wasn't a follower of Judaism. He wasn't really Jewish in the way that we perceive Jewish. And he created a cult, a death cult, a satanic cult, known as Sabbatianism. And what Sabbatianism did was invert everything. So if in Judaism you had a fast day, in Sabbatianism it would be a feast day. If this said don't abuse children, then in Sabbatianism you abuse children. It was a complete inversion. And he was operating in the Ottoman Empire, the Islamic Ottoman Empire. And the Sultan said to him, you either convert to Islam or, we'll sort you out. And so he converted, and a lot of his followers converted. And these became known as Donma or Donme, which means to turn. And this started a technique whereby Sabbatians would pose as one culture or one religion, in this case Judaism, but actually be following this Sabbatian satanic cult religion. And so these Donma operated as followers of Islam within the Ottoman Empire, but they were Sabbatian cultists. You follow this line of Donme, through history, and it's a long story, but I do tell it in the trigger. And you end up realizing that a modern expression of this Donme is the Saudi Arabian royal family. You also find that a guy called Wahhab, from which the extreme form of Saudi-sponsored Islam,
Sunni.
ISIS, etc., comes from, Wahhabism as it's called, was also a Sabbatian. And the British Empire brought Wahhab together with the House of Saud. In fact, his daughter married into the House of Saud. And so you have this fusion at that time, and still now, between the Saudi royal family, fake Islamic royalty, and the Wahhabism extreme head-chopping version of Islam. Another strand of this Sabbatianism came through and manifested as people like the House of Rothschild. They're not Jewish, they are Sabbatians who pose as Jewish while following this satanic religion. Because in the next century, after Sabbatai Zevi, along came Jacob Frank, who Jewish sources that I quote in the book call one of the most frightening people in Jewish history. He was not actually Jewish, except officially. He was another Sabbatian. He claimed to be the reincarnation of Sabbatai Zevi and of the biblical patriarch Jacob. And the cult became known as Sabbatian Frankism. And he really advanced the infiltration, Donmeh style, of the Roman Catholic Church. And eventually the whole Christian Zionist movement came out of this, the vast overwhelming majority of which have no idea actually about the background. So this Sabbatian Frankist cult created Israel, posing as, followers of Judaism, etc., to scam the general Jewish population that they actually represented them, when actually they're a cult. And there's a chapter in the book called Atlantic Crossing, where I talk about how this cult moved in on America. And this is the cult that is protected by this expansion of the definition of anti-Semitism to stop any legitimate investigation of the cult.
So, all right, David, let me ask you a question. As you're watching Israel today, based on where Tim was taking us, and watching about Netanyahu and Barak, and looking at Gant, and looking at what's happening, do you think that this represents the true struggle between the people who think that this Sabbatianism is coming to an end, or they're fighting against it? Because when you watch what's happening in Israel and what's going on between the ruling powers, it's quite a mess that's going on, and it always seems like it's some kind of conflict about who's right and who should be, and elimination or taking back control, those kind of issues.
What you have in this Sabbatianism is the core that's running it. And as you come down from that central core, that peak of the pyramid, if you like, then you've got representatives of it that do fight among themselves. They do want power, and they do want to be at the top of the greasy pole. But this is always controlling that. So what's going on in Israel at the moment, this tussle between Netanyahu and this guy, Benny Gantz, in the outcome, it will be basically the same. And of course, the kingmaker is this guy Lieberman, who's so far right he meets himself coming back. So let me just give you a little sequence on the basis of what I've just described, because this Sabbatian Frankist cult moved in on America. It infiltrated the CIA and these agencies. It infiltrated the Pentagon. It infiltrated and massively funds American politics. It's the cement that connects, like Mossad in Israel with the CIA, etc. Here's a sequence. In 1979, the so-called father of Israeli intelligence, a guy called Issa Harel, of Mossad fame, etc. And Mossad and Shin Bet, the domestic intelligence agency in Israel, is a Sabbatian Frankist front. And this is why Epstein was connected to Mossad, and why his madam, Ghislaine Maxwell, was the daughter of Bob Maxwell, the newspaper publisher in Britain, who was a Mossad agent. I mean, it all connects. The tentacles go everywhere. So here's the sequence. 1979, Issa Harel told an American journalist that he believed that there was going to be an Islamic attack on New York's biggest building. The same year, 1979, Benjamin Netanyahu established or held a conference in Jerusalem, attended by Father George Bush, about the need for a war on terrorism. And in 1984, he had one in Washington of the same, with all the big wigs of the Republican Party, etc., and the Democrats there. And he wrote a book to Netanyahu calling for a war on terrorism. He became prime minister eventually, and in 1996, a guy called Richard Pearl, who's very, very much connected to the Pentagon at the time of 9/11, fronted a group of ultra-Zionists to produce a document for him called A Clean Break, basically how to secure the realm being Israel. And this Clean Break document in 1996 called for as much inter-Arab conflict to be generated as possible. It called for Saddam Hussein to be removed from Iraq, and so forth, for Syria to be targeted. And then a year later, the same Richard Pearl in America was one of the founders of what you mentioned earlier, a so-called think tank called the Project for the New American Century. This was co-founded by two ultra-Zionists representing Israel, called William Crystal and Robert Kagan. By the way, Robert Kagan's wife is called Victoria Nuland, and she oversaw the coup in Ukraine, much of the background of which was funded by George Soros. This world is very, very, very small when you get to its core. So the following year, the Project for the New American Century, which had among its number in 1997 Dick Cheney, who would be 9/11 de facto president, vice president officially. It had Donald Rumsfeld, who would be 9/11 defense secretary. It had Paul Wolfowitz, who would be Pentagon deputy defense secretary. It had Dov Zakheim, who was the comptroller of the Pentagon at the time of 9/11 and oversaw the entire budget. John Bolton, still around, trying to bomb anything that moves. He was involved in it as well. The following year, this crowd, 1998, wrote to Bill Clinton urging him to invade Iraq and remove Saddam Hussein. In year 2000, the Project for the New American Century, this crowd, produced a document calling for American troops to fight multiple theater wars in the Middle East and elsewhere to remove regime change a series of governments and leaders. So this Project for the New American Century produced this document in September 2000, and they listed a series of countries they wanted to regime change using American troops. And they were Iraq, Libya, Syria, Iran, which is why they're going for Iran still now, Lebanon, North Korea, leading, quote, to regime change eventually in China, all of which kind of you can see what's happened and what is happening with regard to them.
General Clark was very open about that.
Yeah, General Wesley Clark was speaking on Democracy Now! Television program in which he describes how he was told all that later, but it was in the document. And so you then had in this document something crucially relevant to 9/11. And that is, it said that this process of transformation that this group demanded using American troops, in other words, of these regime changing these countries, would be necessarily slow, absent, this was the quote, absent some catalyzing or catastrophic and catalyzing event, like a new Pearl Harbor. This was in September 2000. The people that wrote that document came to power with Bush in January 2001. And 9 months after they came to power, America had what Bush called at the time the Pearl Harbor of the 21st century. And as a result of that, 9/11, the sequence of countries has been targeted ever since, one after the other. Iran is in the gun sights now. Now, what makes that even more connecting into this cult, this Israel connection, is that, as I show in the trigger, the ultra-Zionists, shall we call them, before, during, and after 9/11, involved in that whole story, is absolutely phenomenal, fantastic. The ratio is unbelievable. The number of Jewish people in the world is 0.2%. In America, it's 2%. And that what I'm talking about with this cult is a tiny, tiny fraction of that 0.2%. And they themselves are not practicing Judaism. They hate Jews, actually. It's an inversion of Judaism, this cult. And so you had all these different areas before, during, and after covered by ultra-Zionists, and including Michael Chertoff, who oversaw the whole of the non-investigation. The person running the 9/11 Commission that covered the whole thing up was Philip Zelikow, ultra-Zionist. And how many people know that in 2001, 200 Israelis were arrested in America for running a spying ring, 140 before 9/11, 60 afterwards, and they were eventually let go by Michael Chertoff. Or that there were 5 Israelis found or seen, they were later arrested. At the time the first tower, the North Tower, was burning, filming it, high-fiving and cheering, and they became known as a result as the Dancing Israelis. They were arrested by the authorities and the FBI, and they were connected to a company called Urban Moving Systems that was headed by a guy who ran that show called Suter, and he was he was questioned, shall we say, by the FBI, who said to this Dominic Suter that we're going to come back and question you again. Well, they didn't, because he was on a plane to Israel, and away he went. And these 5 Israelis who were cheering, and when you read the book, you see they clearly had prior knowledge of the tower being hit, the towers being hit. They were held for 71 days by the FBI, and then they were let go by Michael Chertoff. And so it goes on, one after the other after the other. And
what about the art group, David?
Oh yeah, the art.
What about the group of artists and their connection?
Well, in this spy ring of 200, lots of them were posing as artists. And by the way, according to official documents, the center of the spy ring was a place called Hollywood in Florida, where 15 of the 19 alleged hijackers, including Mohammed Attar, spent time at the same time the ring was operating. When people read the book, they will be stunned at the explosion of connections. Then, of course, you look at the fact that a computer company called P-Tech had control of the computer screens and the computer systems across the Pentagon, across the White House, across the government in general, across the Federal Aviation Administration, across NORAD, the military response system to hijacks that never responded on 9/11 in any way that affected events. And when you realize at the same time that that computer system was controlled on 9/11 by that company, which was run by an ultra-Zionist, you also realize that very same day that a stream of war games, war exercises, scenarios, unprecedented in number, were happening in the skies, the 9/11 skies of America.
Distraction.
Same day.
Same day, same time. Yeah. And one of the scenarios was for a plane to crash into a building, the reconnaissance center in Washington. And the man who decided that this unprecedented number of war games would be carried out in the skies over the same skies as the 9/11 hijackings was Ralph Eberhart, the head of NORAD, the organization that should be responding to hijackings of the 9/11 variety. And that same Ralph Eberhart, 12 hours before the attacks, put the protection level of Pentagon computer systems and military computer systems onto its lowest level. And what you see if people read the book is that not only did the NORAD screens and the FAA screens of traffic controllers have the planes that were flying, including the 9/11 planes on the screens, they had lots of simulated planes and war game planes, because if anyone taking part in a real plane in the war game, then air traffic controllers needed to know where it was for safety reasons. But there were lots of simulated planes as part of this war game too. They're known as sim. And they were on the screens live. It's what's called sim over live. And I quote one of the NORAD response people at a place called Rome in New York State, where they were orchestrating the response from. He shouts at one point, "Get rid of the goddamn sim," because it was completely destroying their ability to follow events. Now,
and their conversations about realizing, not knowing which one was the sim and which one was the hijacking aircraft.
Exactly,
there was so much of that.
And what you therefore had was external. I explain all this in detail. External control of the computer systems and the air traffic screens, and the ability, because you had real-time backdoor control, to put planes on those screens that didn't exist, and to remove planes like 9/11 planes, the 4 that did exist. Because it's my contention that the planes that hit the buildings, actually didn't hit the building in the Pentagon's case, were not the planes that left the airport. And it's very clear when you see the evidence that that was the case.
Or the plane that did not collapse, that did not crash in Philadelphia, in Pennsylvania. There was no plane in Pennsylvania.
I go into that in the book. The amount of debris where that plane was supposed to come down, Flight 93, was ridiculous. There was no plane there. Obviously, the whole story was fake. But this is what you're looking at: a lie so big that people cannot grasp that anyone could pull off such a scam and tell such a lie. And we have, of course, a precedence for this. People say, oh yeah, that's far-fetched. Well, how far-fetched was it? We're talking about 2001. How about Operation Northwoods that was planned, this is in the official documents from the official archive, that was planned in 1962 during the Kennedy administration, not by Kennedy, but by the Joint Chiefs of Staff at the Pentagon, headed by the chairman, a guy called Lemnitzer. Now, what came to light with these Northwood documents was a plan whereby, wait for this, the military would orchestrate apparent terrorist attacks by Castro's Cuba in American cities, New York, Miami, etc. were named. They would attack American shipping and claim it was an attack from Cuba. And here's one part of the Operation Northwoods document. They planned to have a plane that was on a scheduled route from an East Coast airport down south that took it across Cuban airspace at a very high altitude. The plan described how another plane, a drone, flown from the ground, which is what I say the planes that hit the Twin Towers were, it would be painted in exactly the same livery as the plane leaving the airport on a scheduled flight. And it says in the document, on that scheduled plane would be, quote, carefully selected passengers. The plane would then go on its route, and this is all described in the document, in the official record. And this drone would take off from Eglin Air Force Base in Florida and would get so close to the scheduled plane that it would appear as one blip. The scheduled plane would then land at Eglin, and the drone would be flown across Cuba and exploded by radio signal. And they even say in the document, we won't say it's happened, we'll let the international aviation authorities tell us it's happened because that will give us more credibility. And they were going to blame the attack on Cuba to justify an invasion of Cuba. And apparently Kennedy sacked Lemnitzer when he found out, but he actually went on to become a bigwig at NATO. But
David, we got to take another break here. When we get back, let's continue this. And also, I'd like to, since this is, I want to advance this to another level. We only got a half hour left with you. I want to advance this to where this 9/11 setup, as you know, it's been set up, and many people have spoke about it, including yourself, probably the leader of this. But this cabal, this satanic cabal that's organizing not only 9/11s, but probably every war I've ever experienced, from Pearl Harbor to around the world. I mean, it's just problem, reaction, solution over and over again, just some more advanced than others.
One also.
And all the wars, yeah. And so let's advance it to this cabal. What's motivating them, and what's behind them, once and for all. And let's find out exactly what. We probably won't have time to talk about solutions in the next half hour, but perhaps another time. But let's talk about what's going on with the satanic occult. Yes.
Yeah, it's also important to get in what the end game is, which is looking as
and what people can watch out for too, David.
And the end game being our crisis that's coming. That's what the game they're trying to set up. Yeah. Right, guys. We're talking to David Icke. We're going to get into the end game next. Come on, once and for all, we're going to find out what's really behind the occult. The occult, the satanic occult, what's been running the world for a long time now. More to come. We'll see you in a minute. All right. We are back with David Icke, the one and only. He's a not only international author, but we've been talking about his book, his latest book, I should say, The Trigger, The Life That Changed the World, Who Really Did and Why. And we're leaving off on advancing to another level of the people behind this. And we can give specific names like you have listed with the Rothschilds and the defense secretaries and all the people involved in 9/11, the Bushes. However, there's a common theme amongst all these people, isn't it? And that common theme is a satanic agenda. Can you describe a little bit about that and some of the details of how really this is this is not for the innocent and the young here. This is something that's beyond almost belief. Unbelievable.
Yeah. Walk a little on the wild side for us now, David.
I'll go very much on the wild side if people are new.
Now you're
new
talking.
To me. When I started investigating this 30 years ago, it was very clear that the coordination over such a long period of time meant there had to be another level of this that was beyond the human reality. And in my research, I've covered so many different subjects because you have to uncover this stuff. And that prime to that is the nature of reality itself. If people don't realize what reality is and think that the solid reality we appear to be interacting with is how things really are, then they'll never get what's going on, because very quickly this cult knows what reality is and how it works. And it manipulates using that knowledge while keeping from the population the knowledge of how reality works. So much of what they're doing would be impossible if this world was solid and what it appears to be. So they keep from us that how reality works so that people just wave away when people like me saying this is how they're doing it. So when people look through their eyes, they think that they're seeing everything there is to see in the space they're looking at. They're not. They're seeing a tiny fraction of it. According to mainstream science, the electromagnetic spectrum is 0.005% of what exists in the universe. And visible light, which is the only part of the electromagnetic spectrum, and it's tiny, that we can actually see, is a smear, a fraction of the 0.005%. So while people are looking out their eyes and thinking they're seeing everything, they're seeing a tiny band of frequency. Think radio station, think television station. And all the others sharing the same space, all the other realities, we can't see because we're not tuned to them, literally. So when people talk about this world, and I talk about this world being manipulated from other dimensions of reality, people say to you, well, why can't we see them? Well, we can't see them for the same reason that if you tune your radio to radio A, you're not going to hear, and if it's a television, see channel radio B, because you're not tuned to it. So we're only seeing a narrow band of frequency. And this cult is the, almost said human, actually it's hybrid. It's the representative of a force that operates and is not human outside this band of frequency that we call the world. And it's its representative in human society. So these secret societies and networks are advancing the manipulation of human society in a particular direction on behalf of, as gophers and agents of, this unseen force. And therefore, this is the biggest secret of the secret societies, the inner core, not your Freemasons going down the lodge, the inner core. It's why do people think secret societies are broken up into compartments called degrees? It's to keep most of the secret society members ignorant of this big truth, that what they're really representing is this unseen force. Now, the real inner core, they are involved in practicing Satanism, including human sacrifice, etc., literally. And if you go, and I chart this in my books, you can pick up these interbreeding bloodlines that actually are the core of this cult. It's where royalty comes from. And you could chart them through history. They were the people that set up Rome, for instance, and the Roman Empire and what have you, and Babylon. And you see that they were openly sacrificing people. When humanity woke up and matured to the point where it wasn't having that anymore, they went underground. But they're still doing it. They're just doing it in secret. So why are they? What satanic ritual is this? Why are they doing it? Because we are in a band of frequency. This force is in another frequency. And by the way, just look around the world, look around the religions, and you see this force constantly named under different names. Christians call it demons. Islamic people call it jinn. The Gnostic belief system from best part of 2,000 years ago and closer, they call them archons. I've met a Zulu shaman, and in Zulu lore, this same force is called Chitahuri. They're just different names for the same force, and it's told throughout the ancient world, this manipulation of human society by a non-human force. So they're operating in a frequency that's different to this one. What the rituals do with their chants and their colours and their various
sacrifices.
Well, I'll come to that in a sec. And their various methodology is they're creating an energetic frequency connection with this other level. And when they are doing rituals to the gods, these gods are this force. And I've talked to people around the world, not least in America, who have witnessed these rituals, and they describe how in the most powerful of them, these non-human entities slip through into the ritual because the if you like, the gateway frequency channel has become so powerful that they can change frequency. They can't stay here for long, but that's.
But they can manifest into this plane and hold this this level of consciousness through this incantations and rituals.
Yes, they can.
That makes so much sense about ritual traditions.
That's why they
inherent in all religions.
Now, there's another thing, which is, you know, when the Morpheus character held up the battery in the Matrix and said the machines have turned humans into one of these. Well, that was a profound truth, because this force feeds off human energy. It's its sustenance. And because it's in a low frequency state, it can only absorb energy of a low frequency state. And so they have structured human society to generate maximum fear, maximum depression, maximum anxiety, maximum resentment, maximum hatred, maximum regret, maximum guilt, because they are the frequencies, the emotional frequencies that we give off energetically, which they absorbed. And the energy that this force wants more than anything else is the energy of prepubescent children. This takes us back to the stories of the ancients sacrificing young virgins to the gods. Young virgins is simply code for children, prepubescent
See how much
children.
sense this makes, though, Tim? It makes so much sense when you look at it in the overview, David.
And when they're sacrificing a person or a child, sickening as it is to even think about it, the terror that they're giving off is being absorbed by this non-human force outside of human sight. This is sacrifice to the gods. This is what it is.
David, can these entities be considered the fallen in the Bible?
Listen, the fallen angels in the Bible were just describing this force. and it also describes how the fallen angels interbred with the daughters of men, creating this Nephilim.
Hybrid ruling group.
Yeah, this is what the people running our world within our world in the secret societies are. They're the Nephilim. And you look around the world at other cultures, and they'll describe the same situation using different names. They worship these gods, and they're talking about these gods. No, they're talking about the same force. They're just calling it different names. This is how the whole thing works.
So these are the power brokers, David, behind the Elon Musks, behind the Musk, behind the Rothschilds, behind these folks, these entities. Now, when you're talking on this level, you got to bring in, I guess, possession, or at least at this point,
attachment.
At this point, we got to bring in the ET agenda or the alien agenda or beyond our veil agenda here.
Yeah, that's pretty much the same thing. Because I don't call them extraterrestrials, I call them interdimensionals. But coming to all that will lead me on to something else, which is basically the end game. So if you're talking about possession, there's so much background. It's why my books are quite long.
Sure.
We think we have a physical body. It's not. It's holographic. It's actually a projection. It sounds crazy, but it can be so simply explained as I do in the books. The base form of the body is waveform information. Think Wi-Fi. Think of a Wi-Fi field of information. What you do with the computer is you lock it into Wi-Fi, which is information in a radiation field, and it decodes it into a totally different form on the screen to what it actually is in its base form. It's the same with this reality. So we are decoding waveform information into holographic information, which is what we experience as the apparently solid world. Now, in our base form, we are energy. We are an information field. And these entities who take possession of the human body, which has of course been talked about again all over the ancient world and in the religions, they are also an information field. And what happens, and just think, here's a thing. Basically what happens, it's known in science as wave entanglement. If you drop two pebbles in a pond and the waves go out, where they collide and entangle, that's called wave entanglement. So we have got a wave form information field, and the possessing entity's got a waveform information field. And the idea is that there's an entanglement between the two. Now, the more that possessing information field infuses itself in the human field, the more that information starts to manifest as the outward appearance of the human field. And this is what is happening in the exorcist type possession. And I've seen it more than once, where the features of a person who's being possessed start to change, and they start to take on the appearance of that which is possessing them. And it's because the possessing form information has infused itself so much into the human field that it starts to affect the way it looks. So this is what possession's all about. But I want to come to an end game. It's very important, probably the most important thing of all in terms of where we're going very shortly if we don't wake up. One of the things that I've really highlighted and focused upon is the artificial intelligence agenda. And you've got the Silicon Valley crazies like Ray Kurzweil, the Google executive, who, and he's not alone, who was saying that by 2030, they'll start to connect artificial intelligence to the human brain and connect the human brain to, quote, the cloud. Why would they tell us this when it's a massive endgame part of their agenda? Well, for two reasons. One, we have to know about it if they're going to do it. And two, they want to sell it in a positive way. So what Kurzweil is saying is that around 2030, people will start to have a connection to the brain by artificial intelligence. And these are his words. And then artificial intelligence will do more and more of human thinking until human thinking as we currently know it is negligible, disappears. What is that? It's an assimilation of human consciousness into an alien force. Now, I ask this question, okay, so what is artificial intelligence? Yes, at one level it's algorithms, another level it's what they call learning AI and all this stuff, but what is it in its most important state? I say, after years of research, that level of artificial intelligence is actually this non-human force. And what we're being manipulated to do by this, get them addicted to smartphones that they hold, then move on to things on their bodies, and then
chip implants,
go inside the body with the chips. It's already happening. And get them connected to AI. And then instead of having, first of all, instead of having to manipulate human perception for mass control by controlling information, that won't be necessary anymore then, because human perception will come direct from AI. It will be AI perception.
And 5G is opening that gateway right now.
Exactly. And I say that this artificial intelligence, at the level I'm talking about, what they're planning to connect with the human brain, is this force which will assimilate consciousness, human consciousness, into itself. And so you've got Elon Musk, who comes out and says artificial intelligence could be the end of humanity. Yeah, true, as we know it. And then he starts a company called Neuralink to connect the human brain to computers. And if you're going to create this Kurzweil cloud to which all minds are connected in the way I'm describing, then this cloud has to cover every inch of the planet so no one can escape. The only way you're going to do that is by projecting the cloud from space. And tens of thousands of satellites are planned, going up now, to beam this stuff at every inch of the planet. And the company that is putting most of them up there is SpaceX, owned by Elon Musk. The man is a complete fraud and a frontman for this cabal.
David, let me paraphrase what you're saying so I can fully understand this end game, because this is just fascinating information.
Unbelievable is what it is,
to be
and
true.
it's to be true.
So here it is. We have this hybrid of humans now going forward. We're going to be chipped. We're going to have the simulation. They're going to basically create a matrix within our bodies to have this place where we'll be. Is that going to allow us at that point to open up our body vessels for possession, like a manufactured possession for these fallen or for these beyond the veil demons, entities, jinn, whatever, to come in to fully possess our bodies so they could have access to this three-dimensional world again?
Well, what does the brain do? It takes information and it processes it into perception. And you can get information from the world around you, and the brain will process that into a perception. Or you can expand your awareness and you can access expanded states of consciousness, and the brain will then process that. Or you can connect the brain to artificial intelligence and it will process that. And if it's processing that, then we're all possessed. Because the mind of every human would be possessed by artificial intelligence. And
hence
this is the point.
The demons from the other entities or whatever they may be.
Yes.
Exactly. They're allowed over here again to function within this vibration to, instead of experience the damage and pain and anguish, they can experience it firsthand as opposed to sacred. So instead of through rituals and traditions, they could actually function here in the misery while they're generating it, where now they can only do it through rituals and ceremonies and sacrificial.
That's the end game.
Yeah, well, possessing our minds would give them access to this dimension for a start. This reality for a start. And there's a lot to say about what this reality is. We'll have to do it on another time because
no, absolutely.
When people talk about do we live in a simulation, I've been saying this for 20 years. I've been saying it for 20 years.
Yeah, Riz Varick, David, just wrote a book. He's an MIT AI expert in virtual reality, and he wrote a book that literally gives it's awful advanced science, but that we are living in a simulated matrix from a point of view as if you are describing right now.
Yeah, I mean, I've been saying this since the turn of the millennium, nearly 20 years ago, that we live in a simulation, and now suddenly all these scientists are coming out and saying, "Hey, it looks like we live in a simulation." You know why it looks like it? Because we do.
So the end game is this simulation or possession for these entities, energies, to basically take over human bodies so they could exist in this three-dimensional world for whatever reasons. So this is truly the end game. This is where everyone's working so fast in AI to move forward so humans can be basically completely possessed in this three-dimensional world and lose our sense of humanity, I would assume. Is that the end game?
We wouldn't be humans anymore. We'd be computer terminals on a non-human internet. In fact, if you read my books, some of my books in detail, the internet has been created by this force. This is why you.
Which book?
Which book,
thing. David?
Well, the one before the trigger is called "Everything You Need to Know But Have Never Been Told." All this stuff is in there in detail. The evidence to support it is massive.
Yeah. Got it. Well, David, we only got a couple minutes left here, and I just want to say this is such fascinating information and information that needs to be given to everyone to understand this end game, because everyone's individual lives of who they are today is at risk. And this is going to have to be
control of their spiritual identity as they operate in this framework. You know where I come from, David.
Yeah,
I deal with people's spiritual identity because I know this is a simulation. I know it's not real because I have been in and out of this so many times. People's spiritual identity has to be protected.
Yeah, this is the point, Daniel, that, we can be experiencing through the body, and we can be limited to, if you like, 5 sense reality, or we can open our minds and access vastly expanded levels of consciousness. The idea of the AI connection is that to make sure that expansion of consciousness can't happen anymore.
It's stopped.
It's
controlled. That's the end game.
Yeah.
To keep a spiritual being operating in this three-dimensional reality from experience a divine connection, which is part of the greatest growth cycle that we could ever encounter here in this dimension, and they're using that to allow themselves to control and manipulate their goal instead of allowing us to unfold the way we should.
To keep us as batteries.
The thing is, when you expand your awareness to beyond the boundaries of this matrix, suddenly you see it. You can see it.
Yeah.
But when you're stuck in the matrix, when you're in the matrix and of the matrix, you can't see it. But this is why they want to suppress
all the sense in the world.
This is why they want to do it. But got to say this before we finish. This doesn't have to happen. If we take our power back and start self-identifying as the true self, as opposed to the label self, the experiencing self, that's not us.
That's our next show, David. Without any question, that's our next show. Come on.
And part 2 will come for the solutions, because I think you're right on it. And I know your next book coming out will be speaking specifically to that nature. Absolutely. And I think it's wonderful. David, thank you so much for spending these couple hours with us.
Everybody get the trigger. Read it. Become a part of this program. David will be back, and we'll keep exploring our spiritual identity equal to the other situations that's being generated to keep us from doing that.
Absolutely. Again, thank you guys. Thanks for listening and watching. And until then, Wake Up Al will be back with David Icke on what you can do to help save humanity.